Getting engaged is a moment worth cherishing. A one-of-a-kind ring that you design at Blue Nile can help your love sparkle. Just choose your diamond and setting. When you've found the one, you'll get it delivered right to your door. Finding the right engagement ring can be nerve-wracking. At Blue Nile, you'll have the expert guidance needed and a diamond guarantee that ensures you're getting the highest quality at the best price. Cherish all of life's moments and save up to 30% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
Hey guys, it is Ryan. I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I'm a bit of a fun fanatic when I can. I like to work, but I like fun too. It's a thing. And now the truth is out there. I can tell you about my favorite place to have fun. Chumba Casino. They have hundreds of social casino style games to choose from with new games released each week. You can play for free anytime, anywhere. And each day brings a new chance to collect daily bonuses. So join me in the fun. Sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Well, we all remember the summer of 2012. It was a real summer of glory for the whole country as well. British sport, obviously, but the country as well. It felt like everybody kind of came together. Ever since then, really, the country has gone up the spout, in my humble opinion. However, I don't think sport has, and I think what you see going on week in, week out in the world of sport is something that we should be really proud of in this country. And that's why we've decided we wanted to do this podcast. More and more events are being held here in this country, and we'd like to celebrate them and the competitors taking part. My name's John, and I love sport.
And I'm Michael, and this is Anything But Footy, where basically we are on this podcast going to focus on Olympic sports, some of the sports that don't get the coverage they deserve. That's not to say we might not get around to covering some karate, some netball, perhaps some squash in the podcast to come, sports that aren't currently on the IOC programme. But I have one golden rule, anything but footy, so nothing about transfer deadline day, no managerial merry-go-rounds, no weekly wage packets, and no discussion on formations.
As you say, we're going to be unashamedly biased towards Olympic and Paralympic sport. The Summer Games of Tokyo is not that far away. I mean, that's the scary thing.
Yeah, and we are now into that period where a lot of the sports, and we'll discuss athletics and we'll discuss cycling very soon, and swimming and gymnastics and many more of the others are really beginning to ramp up their game now as they do edge towards Tokyo 2020. We've just seen a European Youth Winter Olympic Games finish, so now the focus certainly for all those involved with the British Olympic Association, the brand Team GB, and you know they've been announcing and naming new sponsors this week. That's because that build-up, that run into Tokyo is there.
Yeah, and hopefully as the weeks and months progress, we'll bring you the best analysis and reaction to the sport that matters to us, and some different headlines in preparation for what they call the greatest show on earth. That's the Olympics, obviously, not this podcast. But, you know, we're aiming high. We're aiming high. So Michael mentioned lots to come. We're going to talk athletics and cycling and winter sports and some other stuff that you may not have known has been happening this week. But where to start? And for me, one of my big passions in sport, away from football, is athletics. What was your first memory, Michael?
Well, my first actual sort of memory in terms of Olympics, I've got to be honest, was Torvill and Dean. Sarajevo, 1984, Bolero. And I can remember at that time in my life, one of my cousins was staying with us long term, was working at a department store in Watford that I don't think exists anymore. So I had to share a bedroom with my sister, who was about 4 years older than me and massively into figure skating. So I can remember she had this little portable TV in her bedroom. And I know this is 1984, but it was a black and white TV. And so I remember being able to stay up late and watching Torvill and Dean. And that was my first kind of memory of the Olympics. First time I became aware of what the Olympics were. And then obviously at that point, the way the Olympic cycle worked was you had winter and summer games in the same year. It only changed sort of after when we went to sort of Albertville, Barcelona, and they started splitting them every 2 years. So straight off the back of this Winter Olympics and Torvill and Dean, we were straight into getting up early, watching breakfast TV and watching Los Angeles in '84, and Daley Thompson, who really, for me, was just someone I remember getting up early. I can remember watching him with my quilt over me and the sofa downstairs and watching, as I say, breakfast TV. And he was the first hero, really.
Yeah, LA '84 for me was the big. I remember the Bolero, as you say, but yeah, LA '84. And Daley Thompson's decathlon on the Spectrum at 48k. I don't think the two little keys that were they were padded keys, weren't they? And you used to pound away to try and get him down the hurdles.
And
the
bizarrely, many years later, I got to interview and meet Daley Thompson a couple of times, and I was invited actually to a golf event, which was the British Masters Golf, and he was there with a sponsor's appearance. And one of the things that he did was play Daley Thompson decathlon with some competition winners. So a slightly surreal afternoon in my life where I was playing the original Daley Thompson decathlon with Daley Thompson. And he's still got that competitive edge. He might be, his career, his gold medal winning career might be behind him, but he's still got that will to win.
Yeah, he's a nice guy. So the athletics this weekend was the big indoor Grand Prix in Birmingham, one of my favourite cities. I grew up there for 5 years when I was the age of kind of 4 to 11, which was an amazing place. I remember we were bidding for the 1992 Olympics, which just kind of brings very strange memories of that. But it's a great city and a great venue, and the athletes love it. And I think it was shown yesterday with Samuel Tefera breaking the world record in the men's 1500 metres, and some great British performances as well.
Yeah, it's a great sports city. I was lucky enough to work as a sports reporter in Birmingham for 3 years, and it's just got some fantastic venues. And of course, with 2022 and the Commonwealth Games coming, we're going to see more venues built in the wider Midlands area, if you like, with an aquatic centre coming to Sandwell, the NEC. You've got the indoor arena there as well. But yeah, the team has been named. The British team has been named now for the European indoors, which is coming to it. Let's say another great British sporting city with Glasgow, and we'll mention more about what Glasgow is going to be hosting in the future shortly, off the back of things like the European Championships and, of course, the Commonwealth Games. But that team has been named, a record equalling 48 athletes, 9 from Scotland. I think there's something to be said about what Scottish athletes are doing at the minute. 26 women, 22 men. And I would say, looking at the team ahead of the European indoors, which obviously, as I mentioned, coming start of March to Glasgow, only one British male sprinter in there, and that to me is a bit of a disappointment.
Yeah, I sat and watched Reece Prescott yesterday, and he ran equalled his personal best indoors, 6:53 in Birmingham, and he sort of said afterwards, "Look, chill out. I'm not going to the Euros indoors in Glasgow. I don't feel I need to. It's the Worlds in Doha in September, and that's the big aim." But I also watched in the women's 60 metres yesterday in Birmingham, Asha Phillip. And, we've met Asha several times and interviewed her, and she is, a multi-medal winning relay sprinter. But she's also the defending indoor European champion, and she did that 2 years ago, and she's going to go to Glasgow and defend her title, and she was just literally pipped yesterday by double Olympic champion in Rio, Elaine Thompson, which shows how brilliant the form Asha Phillip is in again. And I just wonder whether, that Asha has got into the habit of winning medals. And Reece obviously got to the world final in 2017 in London, which we saw, and he did medal last year in the Europeans outdoors. But you just think, is it a chance to go to Glasgow and say, I am the British number one, I am the big 100-metre star over 60 metres, or is he doing what him and his coach obviously think it's the right thing, and just going, actually, no, we're going to sit tight on this. Indoors, not what we're about, and we're going outdoors. Do you know what I mean? Getting into the winning habit a little bit.
You've covered multiple Olympic Games. You've covered Commonwealth Games. This is where we want our athletes to deliver medals. At World Championships and Olympics, that is essentially what they're going to be based their funding on in the future, and what they're going to be remembered for and ranked on. How many times have you, when you've interviewed athletes at a Commonwealth Games or an Olympic Games, heard from them, this is bigger, this is more spectacular, there is more going on here than I've ever known before? I think there is a lot to be said for going into a championship environment, racing regularly, being in that bubble for a few days. It's a European indoors. As far as an athlete's concerned, it's probably at the bottom of their pecking order. but the experience that they could get from just being in and around and having to get the bus to the venue, having to deal with that extra media spotlight that they're going to have to go and do doping and all the other things that come with being at a major championship. I think that's invaluable experience. And you look at people like Ailey Doyle and Laura Muir and others that do want to go there and do want to compete. We see Ailey Doyle competing on the circuit week in, week out, whether it's Diamond League, whether it's British Championships. She's always there. And then when it comes to the big meetings, she's very consistent in delivering performances, getting to finals, winning relay medals. I do think there is, as you say, something very invaluable in going. Reece Prescott, obviously him and his coach don't think so.
Yeah, and it's interesting, you mentioned, the team, and, there's more women again in this team than the men, and Katarina Johnson-Thompson, I mean, we have, again, we've interviewed her many a time when she burst onto scene in 2012, that glorious summer that we talked about at the start. But then she's been through some really tough years and really, really struggled. But, again, she just, in the last couple of years, started winning medals, started doing things. The same with Laura Muir. Yesterday, what a performance in Birmingham. I mean, she just totally tore away the opposition in that mile race and took, obviously, Kirsty Wade's 31-year British record. She now has 6 British records, Laura Muir. But remember in Glasgow 2014 when we were there, and she was a big Scottish hope to win some medals, but she couldn't do it. And she's even admitted now that she's had to change her mentality and is more about enjoying it and taking the pressure off. And she is the poster girl for these championships, but she's got into that winning habit.
Yeah, and Laura Muir as well probably came up a little bit short on expectations when the World Championships were in London as well. And Katarina Johnson-Thompson's another interesting one because last year was a huge breakthrough season for her. She came to London 2012. She was very much in the shadow then of Jessica Ennis, wasn't she? She was the next hope. She was the successor. And then there were a few dead years for her as far as winning medals were concerned. Then last year she went to the Gold Coast. She won a gold medal at the Commonwealth Games. She became a world champion indoors. She had a really good battle, of course, in the European Championships with Nafi Thiam. Nafi Thiam's missing at the moment. She's got a muscle tear. She's not going to be involved. So this is another chance for Katarina Johnson-Thompson to get another world European medal. Another chance to go into a competition, and that will set her up nicely, I think, for Doha.
Yeah, I think she was actually a bit disappointed that Thiam isn't actually there.
And, I think last year, as well as Dina Asher-Smith did in the sport, and let's take nothing away from someone that won 3 gold medals at a European level last year with Dina Asher-Smith, I think that overshadowed some of Katarina Johnson-Thompson's achievements last year. And when all those lists of sportswoman, sports personality of the year were put together last year, Dina was rightly on there. But as I said, I think I was a little bit disappointed that Katarina Johnson-Thompson had a world gold medal at indoors, as well as a European silver and a Commonwealth Games gold, wasn't maybe at the forefront of people's thoughts.
Absolutely. I mean, just to round off on athletics, and it is a big weekend coming up. It's the first weekend in March up in Glasgow, the European Indoor Championships, and there are going to be some British names in there that you're not going to recognise. But interestingly enough, Holly Bradshaw is and performed brilliantly again yesterday in Birmingham and in the pole vault. And again, someone we've been talking about since 2012. Is she on the verge of getting the breakthrough?
Well, I'd like to think she is. She hasn't done it yet. She's just lost her sponsors' funding. So while she's one of the 114 athletes that are funded by British Athletics, and they have various stages, so there's 114 on the world-class programme, split between Olympic and Paralympic, split between podium and podium potential, and then another section for relay. She's on the highest tier, if you like. She's called podium potential. But having lost a sponsor who's been with her for quite some time, that would have been a bit of a knock to the confidence. But yeah, she's in great form at the moment. She beat Stefanidi, the Olympic, world and European champion as well, so that will certainly lift her. And, as you say, big things were predicted after 2012. She's had a lot of injuries. She's now sort of 18 months free of serious injury. So maybe this, again, could be her year. Looking to Glasgow, looking at the European indoors, and then going on and trying to do it in Doha. Because as I've already said, when it's look back on your career, it's going to be at the World Championship and the Olympics that people will be judged.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we keep saying, we're not that far away from Tokyo, the biggest show going forward. Just on funding, is there too many British athletes get funding?
Too many British athletes get funding, and the teams they take to big championships, I think, sometimes are too big. 3 hammer throwers went to the Rio Olympics. Now, it's great that Nick Miller is now on that Olympic podium potential level of funding. But realistically, 3 hammer throwers go into the Olympics. I've argued this with various people. There's something to be said for reaching the Olympics being an achievement. And pre-national lottery funding, yeah, great. Reaching the Olympics for Great Britain, representing your country, that was a huge achievement. We're in a different era now. We're throwing lots of taxpayers' money at this. We're throwing lots of national lottery cash at this. And the
Although that's going down.
Yeah,
of course, because people aren't playing it as much.
And the medals are expensive. You know, you're looking like, whatever it is, £500,000 a medal going into UK sport. So if we are, and I know there's been a new fund announced recently for sports like basketball maybe to try and get them off and going and at the start of this run. But if we are looking at our big sports, Olympics, like athletics, like gymnastics, triathlon, swimming, we need to get in value for money from those athletes. And that, I think, is taking smaller teams with bigger medal chances.
This is the Anything But Footy podcast. We're talking about everything that we want to talk about: Olympic, Paralympic, maybe some other sports in there that you don't necessarily talk about on a weekly basis. And we're going to talk fencing before the end of this as well, which is, again, some really interesting stories coming out of that sport. But you mentioned Rio, and Michael, you were there, and I was there for those Olympic Games, and what a games they were. And I think Tokyo will be totally different. And run in a totally different way, although still within the Olympic bubble, so it'll probably feel the same anyway for most of us. But the track cycling, did brilliantly in Rio. And then, as always, people take a break. Some people have babies, get married, etc., etc. But they announced the Great Britain cycling team for the Track Cycling World Championships, which take place in Poland. Again, that week of the European indoors. So it's going to finish on the 3rd of March. Another big week for the Olympic sports of cycling and athletics. And I thought it was interesting in the team announcement this week. Yes, we of course knew Jason Kenny and Laura Kenny would be there. Phil Hines, Eleanor Barker, Katie Marchant, who were all out in Rio. But I thought it was interesting that Ed Clancy was back in the endurance team as well. And again, a name that people will remember from Rio, but not necessarily has been involved in the last couple of years.
No, it's a weird time for cycling, and it's always a bit of a weird time for cycling where they're between their Olympic cycles, if you like, because they are so...
Olympic cycles, I get it.
I didn't mean it. They are so dependent, obviously, on success at Olympic Games for the funding. The National Cycling Centre in Manchester and, everything there is there and all the support staff and everything is all there because they are so successful at Olympic Games. And what we know from the British cycling team is that they don't bring out the big guns, if you like, until they're ready to make their mark on that Olympic stage where they will win their medals, then get judged and then get funded. And so they will bring out the best equipment, they will bring out the best team, they will bring out the best tactics in 2020, and we won't see it until we get to Tokyo. And you mentioned Rio, and it will be a very different experience, I'm sure, in Tokyo. I hope in Tokyo we're not having to weigh our food, which is what we had to do in Rio. It was all about they charge you for meals based on the weight of the plate. So what we used to do was stand in the queues and eat what we thought were the heavier bits of the food. So
I never ate so many chips in a queue in my life.
So that's what we were trying to do before we then got to the counter to weigh it. But I remember being in Rio, and the night before the track programme started, there was an invite to a few people to come up and just have a chat with one of the key coaches, which was a man called Ian Dyer at British Cycling. Because
you get to speak to a lot of athletes, don't you? When you're in part of the media and you get to interview the athletes, and some are more forthcoming than others.
Yeah.
But actually, to get an interview with a coach actually gives you a lot more insight.
Yeah, it does, and I can remember we got this invite, and you chose not to go.
Exactly. What does that say about me?
I chose to go, and I was the only member of the media that turned up. And so there was me and Ian Dyer sat there. Really, really amenable person. First time I'd ever met him. And I said, look, I've got a few different outlets that I'm working for. I'd like to do a few different things. And he's like, well, you're the only one here. I've got an hour in my diary for this. Let's have a cup of tea, have a chat, and I'll put you right as far as track cycling is concerned. And the last thing we did was we went through every member of the squad, and there's 22 been named for this Track World Cycling Championships in Poland. But for Rio, we went through every member, and I got to the bottom of the list, and he'd said to me, every one of them could win a medal. And I walked away that time from the Olympic Village after that coffee and thought, there's no way in the world every member of that team Nowhere in the world every member of that team will win a medal here, but they did. Every member of the track cycling team in Rio won a medal because that is what they're focused towards, that Olympic Games.
And I think it was the Germans were a bit moany about the fact that the British hadn't put their biggest team out until the biggest competition.
I know, it's bizarre really, and they hadn't bought, and the technology. We hadn't seen the technology that they unveiled. They held it all back for Tokyo, and I can remember being stood, probably with you, behind that velodrome and seeing these shipping containers where they loaded these thousands and thousands of pounds worth of bikes worth more than your car and my car. And they hadn't revealed any of that until they got there. And this seemed to catch the other nations by surprise. And it will probably catch people by surprise again. I remember hearing the story about this special saddle they'd developed because they'd done some research into, the effects that the saddle was having on, let's say, the male riders, perhaps. So they developed this new saddle, which obviously was 0.0001% of performance, but it was that little difference, those marginal details, which meant that Great Britain won so many medals.
And I missed out on that interview with Ian Dyer, probably, but I'm the person who said at Glasgow 2014 to you after a couple of days, I'm only doing gold medals now. I can't be doing with a bronze. I can't be doing with a silver.
Yeah, I was still chasing a few silver and bronze medalists around, but you're like, no, it's golds only. It's great time at the minute for British cycling in terms of people who want to go and see cycling. We've got the inaugural 6-day series coming to Manchester in March as well at the National Cycling Centre.
I think Laura's definitely doing.
And Katie Archibald as well, I think, is there as well. Phenomenal cyclist. Katie Archibald just goes under the radar when everyone knows Laura Trott, Laura Kenny. But Katie Archibald, again, turns up in competition time after time, whether it's Commonwealth, Olympic, Europeans, World, wins medals. So that 6-day series, I remember as a kid, that being at Wembley Arena, I think. Very, very vague recollections, but the 6-day series coming to Manchester, another example of a big sporting event being hosted in this country.
We're going to continue rounding up a few things that people may have not spotted that were going on at the moment. And winter sports, obviously, Olympics, as you rightly say, they used to be staged in the same year as the Summer Games, but not anymore. And they get their own kind of focus for a couple of years.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I think, because certainly at the end of last year there was quite a big announcement about snow sport funding, because GB Snow Sport is going to be the new brand for what was British ski and snowboard, and they're aiming to be, Great Britain, a top 5 snow sport nation by 2030. Now, you've got Dave Riding in the World
Championship. Is that after Beast of the East?
I think that might have something to do with it. I think more to do with it is the amount of money that's going to be ploughed in. And this is off the back, obviously, of quite a successful Pyeongchang, where they won 3 medals on snow. Jenny Jones won the first ever medal on snow at the Olympics for Great Britain, a slopestyle bronze in 2014. Then you had Izzy Atkin, Billy Morgan winning in 2018. And they are looking now at the targets, and they're looking at 2030. So they're saying, well, we won a couple in 2018. So in 2022, the target will be 4. We'll then look to go to 7 to 9 in 2026, and then 10 to 12 in 2030. And the way they're going to do this, 1, they're going to put a lot of money into the technology, the training. 2, they're going to identify the sports where they think there are medal chances. So freestyle skiing, snowboarding, park and pipe, they will be the sports that they target. So we've got Dave Riding in the World Championship at the minute. He's just finished 9th, of course. He's had a great result this year with a silver medal in the parallel slalom. He knocked out Marshall Hirscher, the Austrian number 1, en route to that. But it will be the freestyle skiing, the snowboard, the people that are stoked to win medals that they'll be targeting to try and build a big program. We've had the defection of Charlotte Banks to the GB programme from France. She was actually born in Hemel Hempstead, but grew up in the Alps. But she's come back to Great Britain. Why she come back? There's more money here for her.
And there's a ski centre at Hemel Hempstead.
And there is an outdoor ski centre in Hemel Hempstead as well. So, everything is there for Charlotte. No, I think the programme is really being beefed up at the moment. And I just think there's good times for winter sports. We've seen great success in skeleton. We've seen speed skating medals. Elise Christie has just ended her short track World Cup campaign with another silver medal in Turin. And I think we could be looking in the same way that 1996 in Atlanta, Great Britain won 1 gold medal in rowing and then were second in the world 20 years later in Rio. We could be looking at winter sports and Great Britain doing a very, very similar thing.
Looking further ahead, it's Beijing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where the Winter Games are going to be, and they're using the cube where the swimming was for 2008, and I think that's going to be curling or something like that. Anyway,
They're just going to freeze it.
Basically.
It's going to be the first time ever that our city has hosted both a summer and a winter games. So it's interesting. Winter games are very expensive to host and socially raise the game as far as the money spent and the venues that were built. And for a lot of countries that maybe traditionally could have looked at winter games, I'm talking about like Turin in 2006, Albertville in France in 94, for example, the winter games are potentially just getting too expensive to host. It's going to happen in the summer games as well. Eventually, we're only going to be left with a dozen cities in the world that can take on a summer games. So the winter games, I think, increasingly are going to have to look for non-traditional winter sport venues, and Beijing's the first of that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've promised you a fencing story. We will come to that in a moment, but there are some other big stuff going on, some other big sporting events that we want to highlight over the next weeks, months that we're going to hopefully be covering as well. Yeah,
there's a few good things happening. I'm looking forward to the Netball World Cup. I was lucky enough to see England win netball gold.
I think you might have been there, Mike.
Yeah, I was actually, on the Gold Coast, yes. And it was definitely one of the sporting highlights of my life, particularly because the England captain, Amara Gbazi, was someone, when I said I worked in Birmingham years ago as a sports reporter, she featured on a TV show I did called Target 2000 or something like that as a teenager, a really, really shy teenager. Could hardly get a word out of her at the time, monosyllabic, had to interview everyone she'd ever met because the interviews with her weren't really giving me what I wanted for the programme. But I kept in touch with her, and then all those years later, reunited, if you like, on the beach with a gold medal hanging around her head and a microphone in my hand. It was really good. So
was it as good as the women's hockey final in Rio?
Oh, big shout. If I don't know, because the women's hockey was fantastic because it went to a penalty shootout. The great thing we won. And the great thing about the netball was they did it movie style with the very last throw in the last second, both in the semi-final and the final. So I'm going to put them on equal prominence. Okay. Can I swerve that?
You can swerve it.
Anyway, Netball World Cup's coming to Liverpool in July. We've got a Canoe Slalom World Cup as well. Great memories of 2012 because that will come back to the Lee Valley. Friday tickets have all been sold out for that, but there are tickets available on Saturday and Sunday. 3 days, 14th to the 16th of June. Kids can go in for £1, which I think is brilliant, 15 quid for adults. And I always love the spring because I just think there's so many great sporting events that sport that we're not allowed to talk about. That all comes to a climax in the spring. You've got, for me, London Marathon, Grand National, Masters Golf, World Snooker, and a new event, well, a fairly new event this year, the London Landmarks Half Marathon, which is in March. It's a half marathon, obviously, around all the big landmarks. Big Ben, starts on Pall Mall, finishes near Downing Street. All the places have now been taken up. I think we're going to see 13,000 runners on the streets of London, but I really think that's got the potential as well to be a big event as far as that spring sporting calendar is concerned.
Now we're going to finish our podcast today, anything but footy podcast, looking at fencing, because I remember that in the pouring rain in Rio in 2016, running from the main press centre to the fencing venue, one of the on the Olympic parks in Rio, and it was absolutely pouring rain. We hadn't won a medal by that point, and considering it was our greatest ever Olympics, the first few days, I think there were a few nerves, and the fact that we hadn't won any medals.
Slow start, wasn't it?
Really slow start. And I can remember running in the rain, going, I can't believe I'm running to go and watch a fencing. I think it was a semi-final. And I got there, and it was another great sporting venue and an amazing place to be. And I think you were somewhere else in Rio trying to find it?
Yeah, I was on the Copacabana where I think road cycling had taken place, and I'd gone down there to see Lizzie Armitstead, who'd just come up short on winning a medal. And I was running around the Copacabana going into bars and clubs and restaurants going, is anyone showing the fencing? And everyone looking at me completely and utterly blankly. And eventually I found this bizarre kind of Anglo-French tea room stroke patisserie where they served me up some French fancy, some Earl Grey, and a guy who spoke perfect English who managed to change the TV channel and find the fencing semi-final. Unfortunately, after all that,
we didn't win
the medal. Richard Cruz finished fourth. But the reason we're mentioning him today is he's become world number one with a victory at the World Cup in Tokyo. 35 years of age. He won Great Britain's first World Championship medal in 58 years last year. and he's now the world number one. And so, in pole position going ahead to Tokyo.
Now that's fantastic. And that does show the beauty of Olympic sport, and that's what we're going to try and cover here on a weekly, fortnightly, regular basis.
As we get around to it. That's the plan.
Well, I mean, we've got a big week coming up in a couple of weeks, as we mentioned. So the Euro Indoor Athletics in Glasgow, that first weekend in March, and the World Track Cycling as well in Poland that week, beginning of February the 27th. So it's going to be an interesting few weeks for British sport as we really count down to Tokyo. I think maybe next time we need to work out how many days it is till Tokyo.
We should probably have done that before this time, to be honest. But yeah, let's make a note of that for next time.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.